Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. So I'm just going to give a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kara Curtis, who helped to coordinate the panel today. So this initiative, the Democracy and the Informed Citizen, is thanks to a grant from the Pennsylvania Humanities Council and the Federation of State Humanities Councils. And they call it the Pulitzer Grant because it's supported by the Pulitzer Prizes. And the idea being to look at how particular communities and using stories from your communities can start to look at history and journalism and media and ways in which representation has shaped your community. So for Greater Carlisle area, we conducted the Heart and Soul Initiative, where we collected over 800 stories, learned what was valuable to our community, and then also what was missing in our community. And one of the things we realized we were missing were particular stories within the wider historical narrative. So I'm dressed today like I came off the Appalachian Trail because I was coming from one of those stories that we uncovered this morning. We had a story in Mount Holly Springs about an African American church that was completely unreported, that nobody really had taken the time to write the story of this community and this beautiful 1870s log cabin church. And we slowly started piecing together that there was a vibrant African American community living there, that there was this incredible congregation with a school and a church, and it shows up nowhere in the history. And it forced us at the Cumberland County Historical Society to ask why that is the case, and where else are these stories missing in the history. And the intention of some of these panels is to have that conversation. How has history and the media impacted our experiences as well as our history? So this panel and some of the other ones that we'll be holding, and if you grab one of the brochures when you came in, the dates for our future panels are on there. The next one is March 30th, and it'll be here again. And we're going to explore some of these topics over the coming months. So I hope that you enjoy this panel, and I hope that you come to some of our other events as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Kara Curtis, who helped to coordinate this panel, along with Christine Musser and Wanda Hunter, who I have to give a big thank you to. You saved me from having to do some work, so I really appreciate it. So, Kara.
So my job today is to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Wanda Hunter Stallworth. And I ended up meeting Wanda recently as the Historical Society started a community project on the history of Lincoln Cemetery and creating a website. At the same time, unknowns to me, Tawanda, for a long time, Tawanda has been concerned about the physical space and the stories there. So we've got to meet because of kind of that initiative. So, sorry. One of our panelists is ill and is on the phone. So that is something will be going on. So Tawanda is an amazing woman. She grew up locally, graduated from the Carlisle School District, currently is almost done with her Master's of Divinity at Lancaster Theological Seminary. I'm sure she'll be pleased when she has that under her belt. And she's been very involved with a lot of activism in organizations with like Victory Circle and the YW, both here and in Lancaster and various other institutions, and looking at how stories are portrayed and how they should be portrayed. So we're very glad to have her as moderator today. Everyone's bios, everyone who's speaking today and sharing with us today is amazing, and fuller bios are in the program. So we look forward to hearing from Tawanda and everyone else today. So help me welcome Tawanda and the panel.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Mr. Tolliver, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try to put this central, and we'll see if that, if you're able to hear us a little bit better.
Maybe, but someone still needs to control a microphone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carlisha, Mom said she can control that.
Oh, okay, awesome. That's what we need for this one.
remember when phones had cords? And sometimes you had to put money in them for them to operate, and now we have cell phones and different ways of helping. Technology helps us, right? So we're grateful for that. So thank you for your patience while we try to work out. Mr. Tolliver is not able to be here with us in person, but we are still trying to make it work because we do believe that he has such a value to add to this conversation. So certainly thank you to the Historical Society and Kara for that introduction. It is an honor and a privilege to serve as your moderator for this esteemed panel of folks that I'm sitting up here with. And really, I'm excited about this discussion that we will have today because stories do in fact matter. It's been said that there are 3 perspectives to every event. There's your story, my story, and then there's the true story. That being said, it's easy to see how history is often presented with a slant toward any sort of particular agenda. In her book, A More Beautiful, Terrible History, Janine Theo Harris says that we as a society need uncomfortable and sobering histories that hold a mirror to the nation's past and often far-reaching lessons for seeing the injustices of our current moment and the tasks of justice today. To know the truth about ourselves collectively reveals the immensity and ongoing nature of the modern Black freedom struggle, the injustices that continue in many of our current policies, and the problematic assumptions that support them. More recently, on his way out of Michael Cohen's testimony, Representative Elijah Cummings encouraged members of the press that history would depend on their accurate reporting of what was taking place right there in front of them. And he simply told them to make sure you get it right. And locally, as Kara has alluded to, we're doing some research regarding the Lincoln Cemetery project and what history has to say about that, and context matters. So certainly excited to be a part of this panel, excited about some of the conversation that we will have here today. On your seats, you have a 4x6 card and some questions. The white sheet of questions, if I'm not giving correct instructions, let me know. But the white sheet of questions will be for you to answer at the close of the panel before we leave here today. The pink card is for you to write down any questions that you would like to ask of the panel. I will say that as a moderator and also a preacher, I can get a little wordy. I've been given a time limit and I've been told to keep everyone on task, so we'll see how good that goes. But certainly, we do have some questions. The panel has been briefed of some questions that I would like to ask, but certainly your questions matter more, and I mean that sincerely. What you all would like to ask the panel certainly trumps any preset agenda for what we'd like to talk about today. So that being said, I think that's all in the way of housekeeping. We can go ahead and get started. So I would like to ask the panel, I'm sorry, that's not all that I was going to do. See, off task already. So let me just say a few words about the folks that we have on our panel. Attorney Elkin Tolliver is a graduate of Dickinson College and Villanova School of Law and has served as a civil rights attorney. And Mr. Tolliver is joining us by way of telephone. Mr. Curtis Smits is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a graduate of Carlisle High School. According to his bio, his passions include the Bible and being a source of strength and encouragement for his family and young people. I'm going to go back to Mr. Charles Thompson. He is a native of Carlisle and graduate of Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. And he has been a reporter with the PA Media Group, the parent company of the Patriot News and Penn Live since 1988, covering the South Central Pennsylvania region. The young lady that we have in our middle is Miss Samantha Martin. She is a junior at Carlisle High School, which means she's the class of 2020. Her vision is clear and is passionate about many social justice initiatives in the Carlisle area. To Ms. Martin's right, we have Mrs. Tiffany Jeffers. She is a graduate of Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and is an alumni and faculty member of the Penn State Dickinson School of Law. And directly to my left is Mrs. Carlisha Green-Halkias. She is originally from Reading, Pennsylvania, and is a graduate of Penn State Dickinson School of Law, where she also serves as adjunct faculty. She lives in South Middleton Township and is mother to Shannon and Vassel, and I think a new Shih Tzu. That's right, okay. And she is the wife of attorney Michael Halkias, who is the chief public defender for Cumberland County. Can we get a round of applause for the folks on? So we have some, like I said, we do have some questions up here that we will be going over. Before we get into the questions, though, I would like to begin right here to my left and just ask each of the panelists to share a little bit about their experience, past, present, future here in Carlisle, and as it relates to us as a people gathered here today.
I feel that,
Your mic comes on, yeah. If you press your button, your mic will come on, and you press it, it goes off.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I'm an import. I'm from Reading, as Tawanda said. I came here in 2002 to attend law school, and one of the first things that I did was start to look at newspapers to try to get a sense of what the community was like, and I actually started looking at the news here prior to coming. And it was hard for me to get a sense of what the community's priorities were based on like the Sentinel. So I also, once I actually got to Carlisle, I really started reading Penn Live, or what Patriot at the time, I believe. I didn't do as much online. And I think what I've noticed is that now, instead of looking at these two main sources for information about what's going on in the community, I am looking at social media. I'm looking at, independent magazines more, or publications like The Berg more. And I know that's not necessarily Carlisle specific, but there is a lot more information coming at me, and finding it harder and harder to figure out what's truthful and accurate and informative.
Are you not able to hear Carlisha?
Again, we're running back into that same problem. Yes, I can. For a while, I was able to follow, but now I can't.
I'm looking to some folks for some direction here.
Okay.
We might just need to pass you around.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be
I think we might just have to put him in front of everyone or towards the middle.
We're just gonna kind of hand you around to whoever's talking. And then when you're ready to talk, we'll get you in front of a microphone.
You're talking to me now?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So really, in summary, just going from news and physical papers as being the things that informed my view of this area to these kind of different pieces of the puzzle that I'm looking at to get information.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Tiffany Jeffers. I originally moved to Carlisle in 2005 when I came here to start law school at Dickinson. And I was so excited to come to this small, quaint, charming town. When I visited, it drew me in. And I thought, wow, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And when I got here, I felt welcomed by the community. And I lived right on this street, actually, well, catty corner on West. And I felt welcomed, but I started to realize that was that welcome solely because I was a law student, being an African-American woman. I started feeling very isolated as a Black person in Carlisle. And then I recognized that there was a clear delineation of the races and socioeconomic classes in this town.
And I was welcomed here in this part, the southwest part of Carlisle, because I was a law student and an educated person. But the people of color that I would see in town that were not in school didn't seem to have that same welcome from the people in this part of the town. And so I recognized that, and it impacted me. I left Carlisle to practice law in Baltimore and DC for right under 10 years. But when the opportunity arose to come teach at the law school, I jumped. Because again, like I said, this community was very welcoming to me. And in the course of 10 years, I had children, and I thought this would be a nice place to raise children. And so I've been back for close to 2 years now. And what I find is that Carlisle has progressed. And I find that we are all collectively taking action to be a more inclusive community, but those lines still exist. I do live in the southwest part of town. I live across the street from the law school, and my community is predominantly white and predominantly middle class to upper class, socioeconomically, and it's an educated community. When I cross over to the railroad tracks to the other side of town, that's where I see the people of color, and I see the denigration of the buildings and things of that nature. I look at the makeup of the different elementary schools in town, and it's very, the makeup of the school is done by race and economic status. And so that's something that I would like to work, I would hope that we are all passionate about working to move forward and change, integrate the town holistically. I think this is a wonderful place to live. I intend to stay here. I intend to put in the effort to do that. And so I'm excited about this panel. Thank you.
All right, so unlike the last two speakers who have come to live in Carlisle from other places and have gotten to see it change and contrast from other communities, even within Pennsylvania as well as across the United States. I was actually born here in Carlisle. The hospital I was born in no longer exists. It was bulldozed to make a whole bunch of houses up near Dickinson Law. And I went to Bel Air Elementary School and then Wilson Middle School, and I'm now attending Carlisle High School. And over the years, I have noticed similar things to Ms. Jeffers. The race lines in Carlisle are definitely very delineated. Although I do live in that part of town on the other side of the railroad tracks from here, I can definitely tell that there is a major divide between those two parts of town, and I really hope that in the future we will start to bridge more. We already have started to bridge so much, and we've had a lot of progress as I've grown up, but I really hope to help continue that as a native of Carlisle and as someone who cares a lot about this community and hopes to make it a better place for people to raise their children and for people like me to grow up in. I'm on my school's newspaper, so I'm kind of involved with the media in Carlisle, not as much as someone who worked for like Penn Live and the Sentinel, but still to an extent. And I'm hoping to make the stories that are told in the town media more diverse through my work on the student newspaper. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Kurt Smits. I've come to Carlisle. I was born in Philadelphia, and my family moved around a little bit when I was a toddler. I moved to Carlisle Springs as a toddler. I can remember the house. It looks the same as it did in 1940, whatever. I can honestly say probably I'm the oldest panelist who's been in this town for the longest period of time. We moved into Carlisle when I was about 5, 1945 or 1946. Started in the Carlisle School District, which was segregated at the time. And I remember there were some people that graduated from Carlisle High School, but had to qualify to even attend back then. But they were older, and didn't really get to talk to too many people that had that experience here, black people had that experience here in Carlisle. However, in 1948, I think it was, the school district integrated, and it was kind of a scary time, but it was also a fun time. I remember the teacher, my third grade teacher, Mrs. Freeman. She didn't like me. I didn't like her. She didn't like my daughter, even when she had her in class. I don't know what that was all about, but anyway. To hear, so I mean, I've been in Carlisle since 1945, 1944, 45, somewhere around there. And growing up here was a rather pleasant experience, and I've always thought it was a good place to live, a great place to raise children. Over the years, you know, people migrate into town, and some are not the best. And I am just absolutely thrilled that ladies that, like these two former panelists, have moved into Carlisle to make it a better place. I remember the racial divide that you're talking about. I worked at the, after I retired from Amp Incorporated after 35 years, I worked as a hall monitor at the Carlisle High School. Thrilling job. I loved it. It was a matter of not so much telling the kids what to do, but helping them get it. Let's put it the way I used to tell them. I like to help them stay out of trouble. And put her down, don't do that, you know, take off your earphones, and so forth. And the school district did not match up with the stereotypical ideas of high school that you see in the media today or in movies. Because I believe Carlisle High School is one of the best, one of the better high schools in this whole area. There are some real accolades in math and science and art that really should be voiced even more than they are now. They said something about an 85-10-5 principle. 85% of the kids are good, 10% are on the fence, 5% are just, you know, you always have that 5%. Carlisle just blew that out of the water because for me, I believe 90-some% of the kids were good, and you only had maybe 1 or 2% that were going to go the opposite direction. Some of those you could reach. As a hall monitor, I really tried to reach. But going back to the issue of living in Carlisle and perspective on Carlisle, it's always interesting to me to hear the perspectives of people who weren't raised here. And I remember somebody came to visit the high school from Equal Opportunity Organization or something like that. And she said, wow, this is a really negative town. I'm like, where are you getting that? And basically it was, she was more concerned with the black community here in Carlisle. And some of the things that she picked up on were typical of the way in the black community, on the other side of the track, so to speak, kind of interacting with one another. And to give you an example, I saw a friend of mine that I hadn't seen for for a long time. What are you doing with yourself? Oh, I do this, I do that, I play golf every now and then. And the immediate response was, oh, you can't play the golf. Excuse me? I haven't seen you in, you know, like 30 years, and you're telling me I can't play golf. Well, she was pretty much right, but I didn't want to tell her that. I remember one of the teachers called that a game of swing and swear. I don't know. But anyhow, it's little things like that that used to bother me, and I often wondered, how can you make it better? Why is this perspective on Carlisle such? And I took real interest in one lady who said she felt welcomed in one part of the community and not so welcome in another part of the community. And I have seen that happen. and lost students coming into, on the other side of the tracks for different reasons and so forth, and mistreated. And I think, I don't know where that comes from, other than to take a biblical perspective on it. It comes right out of the pit of hell. Did you ever grow up in a place where the kids who had the bigger grades or the higher grades or doing well in school were often mocked, they called names, put down, and shunned to some extent? Well, that seemed to be a part of the black community that I grew up in here in Carlisle. And it was my intention not to go in that direction. I've seen it not only in Carlisle, but when I was in the military. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was still segregation and attitudes of segregation in the military, especially in the Marine Corps and the Navy. But they were getting better. Things were looking up. But I saw one guy who just was a part of our organization. Like, he was just berating Asian people. You haven't even on the ship going over to Okinawa, only 13 years after the war had ended. And he was berating these people only because of what he had learned at home. And he was kind of a tall fellow, and I couldn't understand his idea. Where do you get these ideas? Well, I saw him several months later, maybe 5-6 months later, when I was out in town on Liberty, and he was in a body cast. And I thought, said to one of his buddies there, what happened to him? He said, oh, he started with some of the kids as they came out of this school over there, and they beat him up. He didn't realize they were just being released from a karate school. And, you know, what I call it, poetic justice.
Mr. Smith.
Those kinds of things often set tone for me as one who would not go in that direction. One who would always try to help others, reach others for the good that's in humanity. I love that job as a hall monitor. I also like serving at the youth aid panel with the probation department there. It was a matter of trying to get people on the right track. And so that's some of my history and perspective on our great little town.
Good afternoon, everybody. And good afternoon, Mr. Tolliver.
Yes, good afternoon.
I'm Charlie Thompson, and I am a reporter for the Patriot News, or our internet version is penlive.com. I grew up in Carlisle, had a lot of the same experiences as Curtis and Samantha in that respect. The hospital I was born in is torn down too. So, and my family's been here for many generations, so I feel very rooted in Carlisle, and I you know, as a native, I care a lot about the community and where it's going. And as a reporter, I think I'd like to think that I can look at it objectively and see it, you know, see the good parts of Carlisle and the warts, and you know, just hopefully have an objective view of it. And in that regard, I'm also always intensely interested in what the newer residents think about Carlisle, because I'll admit that I have a little bit of a bias, because, you know, I grew up here, wanted to stay here, and you know, wanted to raise my kids here. And I like to think that it's still the same good place to raise a family that we always thought it was, but I'm always interested in if newer residents see it in that same way, because we know that we have problems, and we know that we're not perfect, but I appreciate some of the efforts that I've seen in my lifetime here to try to keep us moving in the right direction. I think as far as the topic today, implicit bias, I think the Heart and Soul project is a great project, and I think that what you've uncovered there at the Mount Tabor Church is a perfect example of how, in my work world as a reporter, probably for generations, we've gotten a certain side of the story of the community life in Carlisle, but not the entire story. And even today, like I would say that our newspapers, our internet sites, we are the first draft of history. We cannot be the last draft of history. Hopefully we'll always be a good starting point for people who are looking back or trying to get a feel for what the community is like, what the priorities are, what's going on, what the concerns are. But, there's a couple things, like historically, I'm sure that the Sentinel did not have a very diverse newsroom, right? And so you had people who were of a certain set who probably just didn't think that much about reaching out beyond the bubble that they lived in. So you got, I'm sure that we got the white community's news, and we didn't get as much of the black community's news for decades in that newspaper. And one thing, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but one example of implicit bias that I thought that I could share with you when I was thinking about this topic was when I was a much younger reporter in the 1990s, and the war on drugs was really, really intensifying because of the crack epidemic. And the Carlisle police had a series of big drug raids where they took down like 24, 30 or more street-level drug dealers in one big sweep, one big warrant sweep. This was a really big news deal in Carlisle, and it kind of was a wake-up call that, we have the same city problems that Harrisburg does or Philadelphia does, but it's just on a smaller scale. And I was involved in covering that, and so those drug raids gave us a chance to get into the Memorial Park neighborhood and talk to people there. And I remember one of the residents telling me about how he felt that the only time that the news came down to that neighborhood was when there was a serious crime or something like that was going on. And he said it wasn't just the news, but it was the police, law enforcement, like they looked at local government as like they're all too happy to hammer that neighborhood with these drug arrests. But his perspective was, we don't see people working on economic development opportunities here. We don't see people working on educational development opportunities here. And it was very eye-opening. And that kind of viewpoint definitely sunk in with me. If I hadn't thought that much about it before as a young reporter, I can tell you I've thought about it every day ever since, and with every story. And so I guess what I'm getting to say is that we break down the barriers, and we do, as reporters, we do a better job of telling the story when we are conscious of trying to get all sides of the story involved in our reporting. And so I think a lot of us try to make a conscious effort of that, and I'm sure the problem is that implicit bias, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so it's you try to move in the right direction, but it's an evolution. And I guess I'll leave it there and move on to Mr. Tolliver. if you want.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay. Mr. Toller, you're on, and I'll hold you up to this microphone. See if that works.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be participating in this august, esteemed, and thoughtful individual. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. I may be, I know Mr. Smith referred to his age, but he may have me by a couple of years, but I was, I guess I was about 16 when I first started at Dickinson. And I was there from 1966 to 1970. And it was Dickinson being, one of the, if not the oldest liberal arts college in America. It really was an honor and a pleasure to attend Dickinson back then. And I was blessed and fortunate to receive a great education there. There were some great educators, men like President Howard Rubendahl, Philip Lockhart, Benjamin Jenkins. And then there was the academic freedom that one experienced at Dickinson College. It really did become infectious, and the whole spirit of academic, there's something about Dickinson that infects you. It kind of like makes you just become a lifelong, and you just think that it's just something you do from that forever. And such was my experience at Dickinson. I was a fair student. I was not a great student, but I was a steady student, and I did enjoy being a student. But Dickinson was not an easy school. I'm sure it's not easy now, as it should not be difficult. It's not supposed to be easy. But my experience with Dickinson was, it was a great time. But usually, just like Charles Dickens said, there was the best of time, it was the worst of time. It was the times of the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. We were in the full throes of the Civil Rights Movement. It was the age of assassination. Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, all assassinated within years. And all of this happened, I think, between the years of 66 and 70. So this is kind of like, for context purposes, I was part of the battle. But at the same time, there was a feeling that there was still opportunity. You still felt that you had a chance to make something of yourself. Nowadays, with income inequality and outrageous, exorbitant student debt that I see on people, it remains to be seen if that same kind of opportunity that existed when I was a young person exists now. When I was at Dickinson, I think the annual cost of tuition and room and board was about $3,000 a year. Now it's about over $50,000. When I went to Villanova Law School, it was $2,500 a year for tuition. My entire law school education cost $7,500. Now, it probably costs about $50,000, again, about $50,000 a year. How can a young person overcome such debt unless you're fortunate enough to And there's something wrong with that. And it didn't used to be that. And I hope that somehow we can get back on track where that, where my education doesn't come across that much. But again, but Dickinson, I love, well, everybody loves the place where they are young. And I was young at this. Now, I'm old now, but I had some very good times and no complaints. Also had some rough times, but it was a good experience overall. So that would be just my comments.
Okay.
Great. Mr. Tolliver, you couldn't see me, but when you were talking about student loan debt, I got a little excited in my seat and felt like I wanted to, there was nodding and I was going to tell you to go ahead on and preach that thing because you're certainly preaching to the choir on that one. So certainly I'm grateful for the cross-section of age and race and origin of our panel. I think that that's great. So again, a nod to the Historical Society in choosing some young folks and some younger folks and some black folks, some white folks, some men, some women, and I think that that's great. I also found it interesting that education seems to inevitably float to the top of the conversation. Anytime we're talking about history and the ways in which we remember events, the ways in which we acknowledge our stories and the ways that we develop ourselves as societies, education is always right there at the front. So I appreciate seeing how that worked. So I do have some questions that the panel has been briefed on. Previous to this, I have come up with some additional ones that they may get surprised with. If you have already written down a question and you'd like your question to be asked, if you would just put your pink card in the air and someone will come and take it from you and we will gather those together so that your questions can get asked. All good? Great. And certainly this is going to be open to everyone on the panel. I would ask that you would limit your answers to around 2 minutes or so that everyone can share that would like to. The first question is, in your experience, can you remember a time when the story of a particular event, as covered by local journalism or media, differed from your personal recollection of it?
Yes.
We'll start here with
Hi.
Sha.
In the summer of 2003, I studied abroad and took some law school courses throughout Europe. And we were involved in the Iraq War at that time. And, so there's one thing for any of you who are thinking about law school or any of you who can relate to this experience. In your first year of law school, it's kind of like a bubble. All you do is read and learn, and it's really kind of an overwhelming experience. So I would pop out of my bubble every now and again to kind of make sure that I wasn't totally ignorant about what was going on in the world. And the only thing that I was honing in on emotionally and intellectually was weapons of mass destruction. So, we were going in, we were going to capture Saddam Hussein. Our allies embarked on this war with us. NATO was involved. And, in my bubble, central Pennsylvania lens, I thought, this is the right thing to do. He's been a horrid oppressor for 24 years. There's all these civil rights issues. And then I went to Europe, and I was on a bus in England with a bunch of drunk people. I was sober, not drunk. The other people were. And people started screaming at us, oh, they're bloody Americans with their insert explicative and petrol war. I had to interpret, and I'm like, petrol? Oh, they mean oil. So experience while I was there kind of made me start asking people, like, you know, what do you think about this war? And a lot of the people that I interacted with had really bad feelings or bad things to say about Tony Blair because he was the person responsible for engaging, you know, in the war. And I just found it interesting because I had this lens, and it was not only shaped by my, you know, municipality, but my country, my continent, and people, you know, a continent removed or several continents and a body of water removed, had a very different opinion of it, and thought that the war was being driven mostly by greed and a want for lower gas prices. That moment in time and that experience, and I think that's why everyone should travel outside of the country, because there's so many pieces of, or so many things that catch my eye or make me think when I leave the country. So that was my first experience with thinking about how perspective impacts news and coverage.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you just touched on there is that being aware of what is your context. I think we throw that word context around like we're all coming from the same place, or like we all have an understanding of what that means, but to really dig deep into what it means to have a context and what does that, what all does that entail. And even if we have two people from the same town, from the same street, that their families you went to the same church, they went to the same school, it's our individual experiences, I think, as well, that help to shape our context, and being aware of that is pretty important. I believe, Mr. Smits, you wanted to share on this question also?
Yeah, it says here, where's the end of this sentence? An event that is covered by local journalism or media differed from your personal recollection of it. Basically, I have, when I saw that, there are two examples that I can think of right offhand. It's when I lived in Mount Holly Springs, right down the street from where I lived. It was a dead-end street on East Street, and they were going to put a little playground there, and there was some controversy about the land and all sorts of different ramifications as to whether or not they should put it there or not. And one of the only times in my history that I had a reporter ask me a question. Okay, so I guess she came to our house and we gave her our perspective on the playground. And we anxiously waited for the next paper to come out to see how it would be written up. And I said to my wife, did you read that? And yeah, it's not what we said, is it? Not exactly. And it was a slant to it that wasn't exactly what we tried to portray. And the thing was, I never forget what she said. And I said, well, you know, asking her about how to be a reporter and so on. And she said, well, I have a kind of a rule. If I talk to both sides, people on both sides of an issue, and I make them both mad at me, I've done my job. I thought, no, that's weird. But that's the way she handled it. And the second was the murder of a young man here in town, Eddie Turner. He was a good friend of mine. His murderer was from the War College. And I thought somehow they whisked him out of here. And I didn't hear anything about the trial or anything following it. But the piece that came out in the paper just really denigrated this Eddie Turner. And that was the focus of the article. And I thought, what is this all about? And it was a matter of the bias of the paper, or the editor, or whoever wrote the article, that thought it more important to just put down, excoriate this Turner guy. He was a young fellow. He wasn't very old. He probably is, I'm going to guess, 30s, 40s at the time, I don't recall. But Eddie was one of those kind of guys that everybody loved. He had problems, absolutely, but that's what they focused on. And at that point, I just said, well, I'll never buy that paper again. Okay?
Thank you.
Do any of the members of the panel wish to talk about that question before we move on?
Yeah, I'll just mention as a Carlisle lifer, if I can, that there's a lot of stories about Carlisle's own history that I've seen kind of evolve over time. And I mean, this being a historical society event, I'm sure that a lot of you would share these, but we think about the Carlisle Indian School, right? I feel like I remember when I was a kid growing up here that the Carlisle Indian School was kind of celebrated as that's the place where Jim Thorpe went, and they had these fantastic athletes that brought all this glory to Carlisle. You know, Olympic glory, top college football teams in the nation, that sort of thing. And then over the last generation, I'd say from like the late 1980s or so, we started to hear through the work of Barbara Landis at the Historical Society and Linda Whitmer, we started to hear from the Native Americans about their perspective of the Carlisle Indian School. And you found out that, you know, while Carlisle might like to revel in the glory of the fame that the Carlisle Indian School brought for the athletes' prowess, to a lot of Native American families, that school stood for tragedy, and it stood for taking kids away from their culture and trying to rub that culture out of them. And, you know, so I feel like that story has evolved in my lifetime here as a Carlisle resident, and it's very interesting to see how that evolution has taken place. Now we have Native American families who are coming back and taking the remains of children that died here and taking them back to their home burial grounds and getting some closure that way. And yet, you know, you realize that there are also some students that came here to the Indian School and would tell you that they had a positive experience and that it led to good things for them. But the point is that it's just, you know, we only heard a part of the story for a long time. And that, you know, I think we find out, you know, I've certainly found out as a working reporter that happens over and over again. And I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, that, you know, history is an evolving thing, and what we're doing in the daily news business is really a best attempt to try to get a first draft of history, but you have to take that in the context of, you know, what was the staffing of that newsroom at that time, what was the context of, you know, race relations in the community, all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of holes out there, and so anyway.
If I could, this is Alvin Tower, I just want to kind of like piggyback a little bit. I don't have any particular, I can't recall any particular situation where, that stands, I mean, the press is, I don't expect the press to have the same perspective that I don't expect anyone to. So I kind of like look for different perspectives or different takes. But on situations? Well, what I wanted to say is that in terms of the historical pendulum swinging back and forth, when I was at Dickinson in the 60s, I was in my freshman class, there were 10 black to, I think it was like around 30. I mean, it was my junior year as a freshman class was like one of the largest that Dickinson had ever had, like around 35 students. And so I give credit to Dickinson for making the effort to experiment with different models of integration. Now, since then, and those were times of great cataclysmic social change, amidst the civil rights movement, Vietnam. Now, since then, we've made progress. We've had the first black president. But now, since the first black president, now we also have the current situation, and the racial divide. Now, some would argue is deeper than it's ever been. Some places it's almost like the second Civil War. So the question is, how do you deal with this flow? The back and forth. And I guess one answer is when you accept it, not accept it, but you just have to be aware that freedom and your rights are it's not something that you put in your pocket you have forever. It's something that you have to fight for forever. The law, and like in justice, I've been a lawyer for 43 years. Justice is not something you go pick off the tree. It's something you can just get, just ask for it. You have to fight for it. You have to be organized for it. You have to study for it. And that's really important. And don't expect lust to go away, because like my mother used to tell me, the only thing constant is shame. So expect things to go back and forth. Expect things to not necessarily go the way you want them to. But also expect that you will show up and fight for what you want and fight for what you need. And keep your thoughts positive. And look beyond the biases of that. Look above others. Be aware of other people's biases. Be aware of their limitations, but also look for the good in them also. And that's about as good as it gets. And that's one thing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for adding that to the conversation. I think we're going to move on to our next question, just because we want to try to incorporate some of the audience questions. I really like what Mr. Thompson has said about the press being the first draft. I don't know that I've ever, in any history class, when we've studied anything, have they said, this is just one version, or this is just this is just XYZ reporting of such event. History, as I recall it being taught in school, which really was only like 5 years ago, I recall it being presented as a real factual and almost scientific, black and white, no pun intended, series of events that this happened and even, really not even focusing on how things may have been contingent on one another. But just that there's, that these things happened, we're sure that they happened this way, and to really instead look at our historical experiences as something that's evolving and something that we're still discovering and still uncovering. And as Mr. Tolliver has mentioned, to not really putting a lot of weight or expectation on the press for their accuracy, and knowing that biases are there and they're going to be there, and that's kind of the way that it is. That really leads me into our next question here. With regard to the accuracy of the media, I think we all know that there are different ways in which the accuracy of the media can be challenging, and one of those is a 24-hour news cycle. But this question, coming from the audience, speaks specifically to the hostility of many people to the news media. So how does the panel feel about the hostility of many to the news media, and how do they feel this hostility may pose a danger in putting a spin on historical documentation of our times? Yeah, that was a $30 question, so.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know whose question that was, but that's really good. If our panel would like to speak to that, and if we could again keep our comments to about 2 minutes or so that we can ensure that everybody has a chance to respond.
Well, as a student journalist, I often feel frustrated with the hostility towards the media. I always think the media as the fourth, I don't remember what the exact word is. Fourth estate, thank you. With the media being the fourth estate, I kind of want there to be more respect towards the media. And when I was a lot younger, when I first started out as a young journalist, I was very frustrated by that. And I'm like, why won't they pay attention to the media? The media is important. But over time, I've started to understand those frustrations a little bit more. I know that the fact that the press is 24 hours and it updates all the time, and there's so much competition between all the different 24-hour news medias, media stations and print and websites. Between all of those different things, there's a lot of competition. So they have to be as sensational as possible in order to get readership, in order to remain in existence. And I understand people's frustration with that. The idea that people are not getting their whole story is very frustrating to myself as well as many others, so I understand that. And I also understand that people are frustrated with the darkness of the stories. Having a 24-hour news media means you're always hearing about wars. You can't just turn the TV or radio off and not hear about the war and not hear about people dying. So the fact that that's no longer something that can happen is very frustrating to people, especially to those who remember that that was something that was at one point the case. So I've started to understand that, but at the same time, it is frustrating for people to not trust any source of media or to trust one specific source of media and not check their information at all. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Like, it's frustrating, but I get it, but it's still frustrating.
And that's spoken like a true journalist, right? Like, it's frustrating, but it kind of is what it is.
So I think that's a fantastic question. I think and this is similar to my thoughts about education, when we become a for-profit, when the news has become a for-profit industry, it's changed the character of what news is. So this society, the historical society, can't function as a for-profit entity because then you would lose the integrity and the accuracy of the ultimate mission and purpose of the organization. And when we think about the news, the purpose should be similar to an organization like the Historical Society, to provide information, context, and critical thought about the going-ons of society current events. But not for profit, not to make a name for yourself, not for your own identity. And so I think the loss of integrity and the loss of our mission statement and purpose in what the news is supposed to exist for is very dangerous. And what it does is it creates a silo and an echo chamber where you only hear one type of thought, and the critical thinking, the critical analysis component of the news is lost. And without that component of the news, then we hear what we want, and we don't have the ability, we've lost the ability to engage critically with this information and to make a determination of how it impacts us and what we choose to, how we will choose to respond to this information. And so I think it is very dangerous what's happening in society on both sides of the aisle. There needs to be some centrist, I don't know what the answer is.
Well, and I'm a lifelong word enthusiast. I love studying vocabulary. And one of my favorites is, one of my favorite authors is Dennis Waitley, who I got the idea from. It's not my idea. This is something I learned from Mr. Waitley. And he pointed out that as a person that had more expansive vocabulary. And just try it if you don't already know what I mean. And then also apply this not only to yourself, apply it to your immediate friends, your immediate group, and look out over our communities. And just, I think that it's been pointed out that our vocabularies, as if we don't fight to keep them strong, they shrink. And when our vocabulary shrink, our views shrink. And that's when, like you just said, it gets dangerous, it feels dangerous. That's exactly what it gets.
I just want to double back to Mrs. Jeffers and Mr. Tolliver with regard to the expansion of vocabulary and the link that's the underlying assumption that there's a connection between profit or the goal of seeking a profit and the challenge of integrity in light of that. I feel like these two things are related. I wonder if either of you would be willing to speak to that.
Well, I don't want to get myself in trouble by being categorized as a socialist, but I think our capitalistic society, I think capitalism has its benefits and has certainly allowed us to grow and have ingenuity and innovation as a society, but there is a dark side to it that we must recognize. When you are always trying to be one up from someone else, that's dangerous, and that creates Lord of the Flies situation. We can't all exist, we can't all win in capitalism. That's not the nature. So when the news industry steps into that forum or that framework, they can't all win, they can't all equally coexist and have that level of integrity, because someone must win, someone has to be on the top. And there can't be a one without a two in capitalism, so you can't be on the top unless there's someone on the bottom. And when it comes to news and integrity, what does that mean? What do you do? What needs to give for you to rise to the top? Is that truth? Is it accuracy? What are the things that you're willing to compromise in order to rise to the top in a for-profit industry of our, the news? So I think that's sort of, is that?
Yeah, I think, that's a lot of what I really wanted you to say the word socialist. That was really what I was after. Mr. Tolliver, would you be, with what you've said about the size of a vocabulary and being able to think only as far as your vocabulary goes, do you see a link between that and the notion that that integrity is challenged by the seeking of profit?
Mr. Tolliver?
I'm here, and do I think that integrity is challenged by the seeking of profit?
Oh.
Is that the question?
I guess the question is, that being said, if we're able to agree to the fact that integrity is challenged because of our for-profit society, do you feel like that is the way that it is because we're limited in our ideas because of the limits of our vocabulary? In other words, we're not able to see things differently, we're not able to experience life differently and or accept new media outlets that may be more accurate and not in search of profit. Are we limited, are we limited by what we think and what we know to be true about our for-profit and possibly lacking integrity society?
I feel that all of these different variables actually feed on one another. I do think that capitalism, in order for a capitalist to make a profit, he's got to use the work and use another sources of frustration for the worker, frustration for the owner. You know, back in the day, Hegel, I think, and Marx, they talked about these kinds of things, about the alienation that occurs from being a worker. And because when you're a worker, you are being used. That's the essence of that relationship. And usually back in the day, the only reason people tolerated being workers was because they saw the opportunity that one day they weren't going to be a worker. One day they were going to rise above that. They were going, back in the 18th and 19th, that was the dream. Nobody wanted to be a worker forever. So when you have a system where that's what it looks like, most people want to be workers forever, that's a system that's rife with frustration. That's a situation that is rife with alienation. That's why you see a lot of alienation in people today.
Fantastic.
So,
Oh.
but what is the answer? I mean, I don't know exactly. I don't have any answers, but I just say stay tuned and study. But I mean, it's these are the realities that these are our challenges. These are our challenges, and we just have to, apply love. Love is the only possible thing that can solve a situation such as we are in today. And that's the bottom line of it.
I appreciate you saying that, and I've taken a look at the clock, so we're down to a few couple minutes, and so I apologize, Mr. Smits. I want to move on to the next question from the audience, and then I think maybe that this might be an answer to the question, and then maybe some wrapping up comments from our panel. So the question is, I'd like to hear thoughts on how it would look. What would the process be like for Carlisle to become integrated in a holistic way? So Mr. Tolliver has guided our conversation into a direction of love, and one where integrity and accuracy perhaps are a little bit easier to come by. And so this question, I think, really fits right in. It stems from Mrs. Jeffers' comments earlier about working toward holistic integration. Yeah.
So I have a practical thought about it, and I know other areas in.
Give me just 1 second. I just wanted to give some guidance. Whenever you answer this question, if you would also add to it some concluding remarks that you have for today,
Sure.
and then following it, the panel, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to the Historical Society.
A practical suggestion or a thought that I've, sort of been tossing around, and I think it might be the Cumberland Valley School District has gone to universal kindergarten, universal elementary school system, where the school, all of the elementary, I think it's probably pre-K through maybe second grade, they're all in one building. So they're all receiving the same education. And so one of my areas of interest is also property value being a source of revenue for the, property value taxes being a source of revenue for the school board, for the school district. So you have higher, more expensive properties getting more money funneled into their particular school in the same district. It's not just a problem in Cumberland County and Carlisle. It's a nationwide problem. We need to figure out a way to create equity within our revenue systems in the county for our school system, and it needs to start in kindergarten, because when that disparity exists that young, then bridging the gap becomes almost impossible. And so that's one practical way I would say, to have like a universal kindergarten where there is like an elementary school, and then all of the kids in Carlisle go to the elementary school, not based on whatever particular part of town they live in. I think that's just one very practical way. to begin the process of holistically integrating our town. And I think it would be fantastic for the children to see each other. That at that age, they don't have the issues that we have, they don't have the thoughts that we have, and so it's going to spread and expand upon our efforts of making this a diverse and inclusive place, because kids love everyone and they just make friends. They don't have the walls that we as adults have. And so I think that, again, is just one practical thing that I've been thinking about, and I believe they are doing it in some other Cumberland Valley areas. So just to wrap up again, I think I'm excited to live here. I have no intention of moving. I love the community. I feel welcome. I feel engaged. I feel like people are trying, people want to get better, and this is just one of the many examples of that happening. So again, thank you.
I wanted to piggyback off of Ms. Jeffers' statement about schools. Not only do I think that the idea of a universal elementary school, having all the kids go to one elementary school, I think that's a great idea. And I think any new facilities or funding that we would have to use to do that would be 100% worth it. Because I know that at the high school, we kind of all designate each other by what elementary schools we went to. Like, I've been referred to as a Bel Air kid multiple times, and I know kids who proudly proclaim that they're Moreland kids, or that they're proud of going to Hamilton or Crestview. And I know that's super common, so I really like that idea that maybe we would be less divided if we didn't, weren't all separated by our elementary schools, and we didn't base our existence, at least as students, in where we went to elementary schools. Not only that, but I think we also need to provide more funding to schools as a whole and to ensure that it is more equally dispersed among schools in the area. I have noticed, both through studies done by fellow students and by others, that there is a funding disparity among a lot of elementary schools and where that money is going. And I think not only does every school need more money, because I think schools definitely need to be given a higher budget by the state and by the town, but I think those budgets need to be equal. Or if a school absolutely needs more resources in order to be on that equal standing with another school, they get more money than the school that doesn't need as many resources. So I just think it's really, I am very passionate about my school and about schools as a whole. My dad is a teacher, and I've grown up with so many incredible teachers. Many of my role models from when I was younger are teachers. And I think education is so important, and I think we need to provide more money to education. And especially elementary education, because that's where it starts. We say children are the future, and oftentimes when we say that, we're thinking of high schoolers, but we also need to think of kindergartners and first graders. All right, that's just pretty much what I have to say on that.
Thank you.
I heard a lot of good things said today, and there's some things that sparked a lot of thought in my own mind. But the holistic integration idea is sounds good if you define holistic integration. I'm not quite sure what that means. However, my daughter also is a teacher, and she is governed also by state grants, I think it is, with the Head Start program, and where she was an elementary school teacher for a while. And listening to her talk about some of the things that she can't do in their program, that's one of the things that has to change, especially whoever controls their curriculum says, at Thanksgiving, you cannot say certain things. You cannot make certain projects that says, this is a turkey because they did so-and-so back in the days of the Pilgrims to honor or be thankful to God. So there is a movement afoot to get God out of the public discourse altogether. And that's not right. I mean, you know, if you look at where we were, the founding of this country and so forth, which is a larger argument or conversation for another time. But there was a point made by someone here earlier that when I said in 1943 we integrated the school system, you know who became best friends? The white kids. They were new to us, and they come into our community, and we befriended them. I have some very fond memories of people that I, over the years, have even kept in contact with. There were white kids that came into our school in 1948, but still there is the divide. I think what has to change also is whoever is trying to control the national discourse on, or the national narrative on race relations in particular. There's a lot of sensationalism going on that fuels the divide. On my way here today, I heard about reporting on the Cohen, his testimony before the Senate, I guess it was, and they were talking about bombshell testimony. Well, that was a description that would divide rather than bring us together. To start from the bottom up, from the children, like I said, kindergarten, start there, but it's got to go the whole way through the school system. Well, there's one this time.
And my thoughts about Carlisle being integrated in a holistic way, that's a very complex question, and I think that people have been trying to work on that for a long time. But, you know, I think first of all, I feel like it has already been said here that everything starts, the root of everything is education. And I feel like if we can hang on to a quality school system here, that will help us in innumerable ways as we move forward. And so I feel like, you know, I feel like when I went to Carlisle schools, Mr. Smith's maybe a little bit behind you, but you know, one of the positive things that I really saw happening in Carlisle schools was that, you know, I did get the feeling that African American students in my class tended to be pigeonholed, and they tended to, and I don't even know if it was intentional. Again, I think we're talking about implicit bias here, but sort of, you know, the sense that, you know, well, you know, these kids aren't going to go to college, so let's get them in this level, this track of education, they can learn a trade, and, you know, they'll be good to go. I just feel like that was like a pervasive thought, and if a black student wanted to go to college, they kind of had to punch through the paper barrier there and make sure that the guidance counselors knew that that was their intent. And, you know, they had to fight for it in a way. So in the 90s, I started by talking about this. I felt like there was sort of an awakening in Carlisle in the 90s. Around the time of those drug raids, people took a look at some of the divides that had been created in this town, and there was some really positive movement that came out of that. Like, in the school district, we had the Carlisle Victory Circle. Tawanda, you're familiar with that, right? You were on the board?
I actually first branch program for a while.
Okay, you did. Yeah, and I just thought that was such a great development for our school district, because it sort of like offered some extra encouragement to kids that could really use the extra encouragement. And I think that that's an example of how education, when done well, it can be an equalizer and kind of give everybody the opportunity that they deserve. At the same time, you know, we had Pitt Street Pride, which was an effort to take the Memorial Park neighborhood and try and raise the level of home ownership in that neighborhood. And not talking about gentrification here, but there were efforts to take a buildings that had been owned by absentee landlords tended to rent to people who were coming in because they thought they could build a drug market here or whatever, and these landlords didn't really care. And that worked to the detriment of the whole neighborhood. And Pitt Street Pride was about, okay, let's buy some of these properties, let's renovate them, let's sell them to first-time home buyers, preferably people from in that community. And that program was a really good success, and I think that you'd still find that home ownership rates are higher in the Memorial Park area as a result of it. And you know, we certainly don't have, while we still have our drug issues in Carlisle, you know, you don't.
Mr. Thompson, let me just jump in and ask you a
Yeah,
question.
right.
Now that sounds like one big success that you had.
Mhm.
Have you tried to duplicate that?
Well, you know, there were multiple phases of that program, and I'm honestly, I think it has kind of run its course now. So if there is going to be duplication, that's going to have to be a new effort. And I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, by the way, because what I cover more state government. I'm remembering things that I covered as a reporter here in Carlisle. More recently, I've been based in Harrisburg, and I haven't had kind of like a laser-like focus on Carlisle issues that I used to have. I mean,
You were not actually involved in it. You reported.
Right, and I lived here. But I mean, but you could see the benefit.
I misunderstood.
But you could see the benefit, and
Yeah.
for example, you know, you guys might remember, Mr. Smith, you might remember, Tawanda, you might remember, there were areas of the town where there was literally open-air drug dealing in the 1990s, and thanks to efforts like Pitt Street Pride, that stopped. And I was going to say, we still do have a small city-scale drug problem in Carlisle, but the level of gun violence and that sort of thing has dropped back. I mean, I know we were in the news, we were all over a murder trial just earlier this winter, which got a lot of publicity. But the fact of the matter is, year by year, homicides, that sort of thing in Carlisle has dropped back from where it was a generation ago. So all that is to say, it's a multi-layered thing, and it takes education and it takes economic opportunity, but and it takes just people socializing together, you know. Me taking my family to the Juneteenth celebration, you know, the Carlisle Swim Club admitting some African American members, right? Stuff like that. And we have opportunities for this sort of thing to happen in Carlisle, and the law school and Dickinson College and the Army War College really help us. And I don't want to say that we're behind a lot of other small communities, small town communities in America, because I like to think we're ahead in many ways. I mean, but we have progress to make, and hopefully people are working on it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We've got two more folks that we want to hear from, Mr. Tolliver and Mrs. Halkias. So I'll let you guys rock, paper, scissors for that.
Give it to him.
Okay, you're up, Mr. Teller.
I'm sorry, is there a question?
The final question was with regard to integrated, holistic integration. And if you could answer that and give any concluding remarks that you have in about 90 seconds.
Well, I would say that the Harrisburg, Carlisle metropolitan area actually has the reputation of being one of the top places in the country to live and to raise a family. As far as integrating holistic living, I'm not quite sure I understand understand that concept. It sounds like something that I could be through. I mean, it makes sense. My final, I just said thank you for having me. I enjoyed participating with this panel. And if I'm invited back again, next time I promise not to be it so that I can make it quick. Because I think this is a very bright group, and after doing some very stimulating thoughts and ideas, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolliver. Mrs. Halkias?
I would say one of the most basic things that we can do individually and collectively is participate in local government. If integration is a priority for you and something that you value, when you were talking about the Pitt Street Pride Project, I think that preceded me, but I do remember seeing house markers and seeing, like, again, when I came there, a distinct difference in some of those areas. And you know, if you don't understand, a lot of communities, including Carlisle, get what are called CDBG funds, which are monies from HUD, which local municipalities can allocate in the way that they seem or deem appropriate. And you know, if you're not there and you're not involved and you don't understand how those day-to-day things can impact the quality of life for you or your neighbors or shape them. Things like local ordinances, noise ordinances, bad landlord ordinances, which are often kind of difficult to implement and police. But there is such a critical role that I think local municipal governments have, and that goes for school boards, city councils, and making sure that the people you're voting for, if it's not you yourself, which it could be, are educated about the issues that are important to you and the resources that they have. You know, I think sometimes what happens is, and I love government, well, I love some governments, efficient governments. What happens sometimes is people work and they take these positions because they're stepping stones. But as people who are electing them, we need really to hold them accountable so you understand what forces reside in your borough halls and your city halls. So that's my integration piece. There's a lot, in my opinion, to be done at the municipal level. As far as becoming a more learned consumer of media, I would say, you know, it's okay. I think we're all going to have our favorite news source, but you also have to be willing to read, if nothing else, so you know what the devil's thinking. So, you know, I was thinking about this. I read the New York Times every day and do look at the small crossword puzzle because I'm not paying for the big one. And, you know, even that has disparity because that's $15, you know, a month. I think we also need to, as people who are educated and caring about issues of media integrity, implicit bias being overcome in reporting, we need to be stewards of good free media. So, you know, donate to The Guardian, support NPR, and those are just, you know, I was trying to think of things that maybe don't sound leftist to give to, but I couldn't think of anything, sorry. So, you know, but if it's important to you and you're looking for things that, and again, in my view, you know, 10 years ago, I thought these were perfectly neutral and honorable, you know, news sources, and, you know, now when I'm in some spaces, you know, they're called liberal rags. Don't you dare talk about the New York Times. But, so those are my parting words, and thank you for being here and spending a Saturday with us. I appreciate it, and my son appreciates it. He's not the only one here.
I apologize, Mr. Thompson, but we're going to have to wrap it up here. I'm already over time. And they're standing together, and they're looking right at me, which means, Tawanda, do your job. So let's give a round of applause to this great panel. And I'm really struck by some of the insights that were made here today, especially with regard to the importance of education. And I'm reminded of the Maasai tribe in Africa and their insistence on greeting each other with asking how the children are. And I think for the tribe particularly, they're concerned with how they're actually taking care of their children and making sure that the children are in fact being taken care of, even though they may live in impoverished communities or that they are an oppressed people. But I think for us here today, with the automatic relationship that we've made with how society is shaped and how we view history, and the relationship with education brings to mind for me that question in a different way, right? How are the children? Are we teaching our children, and are we teaching them fairly? Are we teaching them in ways that are equitable, in ways that are honorable, in ways that plant seeds for those larger vocabularies so that they can have those bigger ideas and go for things beyond just mere profit? And I think that was something that I really took from here. So again, I am grateful again for this panel. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And Kara and Lindsay, we are back in your hands. Thank you so much.
Any last quick remarks? I want to thank Tawanda and the panel for sharing stories and wisdom with us. Definitely a lot to think about and process as we're snowed in probably tomorrow. And thanks everyone for coming out in between snowstorms on a Saturday afternoon in early March. We hope you come back out on the 30th when we look and have representatives from different occupations and how these ignored and forgotten stories should be shared in the classroom, in the media, in the public history field, as several examples to make sure that more inclusive of the stories we're telling, not just in the media, but in the K-12 classroom, in the museum and public history field. So another part of that conversation will be continuing at the end of this month, and we hope you all can come back out for that. Thank you very much, everyone.